We're in a good place now with combat sports, boxing and everything, where we're getting a lot of cool events coming. Haney versus Garcia, Canelo versus Magnolia, Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk. We have the whole Misfits cards. Fox just had main event. The whole event went south, but at least he gave a good showing against, not a great opponent, but he gave the best showing against Evil Hero that we've ever seen. There's just a lot of stuff going on in UFC with UFC 300, Pereira versus Hill. That's going to be an exciting fight, and we'll see where the light heavyweight division goes from there. Possibility of Conor and Chandler finally happening in June. We have the return of Aldo in UFC, but there's one fight that's very slipped under the radar, and I think is very, very underrated. And that is Nate Diaz versus Masvidal 2 in boxing. This fight has been beyond slept on, and I think for like a good reason. Masvidal shut down Nate completely in their first fight, but that fight was years ago, and these fighters have drastically changed in different ways. Especially Nate, who hasn't won a boxing match, but had a good showing in one. And I just want to explain, you've read the title, why Nate Diaz is going to steamroll Jorge Masvidal June 9th. It is going to be a masterclass, and I'm here to explain why. So, let's get right into it. The first thing right off the bat that I think people miss is a shocker to me too, but Jorge Masvidal is actually older than Nate Diaz. I know, how is it possible? It's just weird. It's just weird. They don't really look like close. I mean, Nate has grays already, and Jorge kind of looks pretty good for his age at turning 40 this year. So it's kind of like, how's that possible? So Masvidal is actually older, so you can't really use like the old guy, like, oh, he's fighting an old guy, but when he's older. But it was just an interesting revolution that I came across. But that also has something to do with cardio. This is the main thing. Jorge Masvidal has not had a good showing in the past couple of years, and one of those things most in his last fight was cardio and how he put together punches against Gilbert Burns. Yes, it's Gilbert Burns, but at the same time, it wasn't really the best showing that he put on, and it was not really like prime Masvidal. This isn't like Nate Diaz Masvidal. This isn't Ben Askren Masvidal. This isn't Darren Till Masvidal. This is Masvidal dying in the ring. He just didn't look like he wanted to be there. And that's one of the biggest things. Like, his cardio goes way down throughout those rounds, while still to this day Nate just keeps skyrocketing up and keeps improving. Which is why, in the second point here, why Nate has a huge advantage. He's actually had a boxing match and had one for 10 rounds. And that's the thing, like, Jorge has a boxing win, but it's from 2006. So he hasn't trained boxing since I was born. He hasn't been fighting specifically in boxing since I was born. So with Nate Diaz, he had an actual 10-round fight in August, been focusing on boxing since, so that means he already has an advantage over him. So he has a cardio advantage, boxing standpoint advantage of just training boxing, focused on that, and focused on the sport, and understand the rules and everything. And finally, he has kind of the will here to try to prove himself in this lane. It's kind of like on Ngannou. Ngannou wants to keep boxing, and he wants to prove himself in this lane and everything. And I think Nate is the same, but I don't think Masvidal is like that. Like, sure, he is known as this pretty good striker, but at the same time, what does he have to prove left in here? So I don't think he's going to go into this taking it as seriously as Nate will. And Nate's just gonna find his way with him and just work him out. Because here's the thing, and this is the main one, because I might have forgot about this, or I might have saved it until now, but Nate Diaz doesn't have power. But guess who else doesn't have power now? Jorge Masvidal. Masvidal does not have power right now, at least not that good of power, to stumble or drop Nate Diaz, which is why he is going to skyrocket on the points. None of them are going to drop each other, but Nate Diaz is going to be putting together way more combinations, way more punches in the clinch, out of the clinch, uppercuts, stuff Masvidal hasn't really dealt with at a pressure, and just keep ramping. And he's going to show out, because against Jake was a straight up boxer for 5 years, and he knew what to do with Nate. He knew his defense, he knew his shot selection, he knew how to outwork him and use the power on him and drop him. And yes, granted, it was a boxer versus MMA fighter at the time. But that's at the time. Now it's 2 MMA fighters, and one of them recently had a match in boxing, and that drastically is different. So, my mind here, what is going to happen is Nate is going to lose the first 2 rounds. I think Masvidal is going to have a good opening for those first 6 minutes. He's going to put some pressure on Nate and try to work him well, but he's going to seriously slow down after that. And Nate is going to take 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He's just going to beat him up for the rest of the 8 rounds, putting pressure on him, scoring points, and in the end, I believe Nate Diaz will win this by 98-92 decision, and it should be a good fight. Now, in the end, I'm bringing up this interesting conundrum to add to this, because it seems like KSI wants to return to fight Masvidal and everything, and all that fight's been hyped up, and I've said so many times why I don't like that fight, and that is with the aspect of it just being hypocritical with the whole Jake thing, and Masvidal just being a lot older and not proving anything. Like, I don't think these MMA matches really prove anything for these YouTubers who specifically train boxing. And I know that sounds hypocritical myself when I'm just praising this match and saying how better it is than people think, but that's an MMA fighter versus an MMA fighter in boxing. This is a YouTuber versus an MMA fighter. And we're not even saying MMA fighter, we're saying retired MMA fighters now. So, yeah, it would just be hypocritical, but it seems like with dropping the cruiserweight belt and doing all this stuff, that KSI wants to fight either Slim, Masvidal, or somebody else like Mike Perry at light heavyweight. And it's interesting to pose up the question, what do you do after Nate Diaz beats Masvidal? That's a good question, right? Like let's say like he has it all planned out and everything, and then Jake's opponent comes along, beats him up for 8 rounds, and wins. What do you do after that? Do you fight Nate Diaz? Do you give him the credit that he deserves for that fight, or do you just drop it completely and find a different opponent? So it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about, but keep what I said in mind. Masvidal's chin is strong, but his cardio, his will, and his power is not going to hold up. And I'm just saying it here. If Nate Diaz wins, don't come crying to me, because I genuinely think Nate Diaz is about to put a masterclass on Jorge Masvidal. So yeah, guys, anyways, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace out.
Hey, be nice. Be nice. They were trying to fight each other.